Hi, Baratunde.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm not complaining.
All right.
Let me introduce us both. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You are Baratunde Thurston. And among other things, you're the author of this book, How to Be Black.
That is correct. I'm glad to see you have a copy.
Oh, absolutely. I also have the Audible version.
Nice, doubling down on blackness.
Yeah. All available sensory receptacles. Your book is coming into me. It's very good. It's very funny.
And to get the enhanced ebook, there's video in it.
Well, you know, it's interesting, actually. I noticed on the Audible version the way you made use even there of the actual media potential. So people who are quoted at length in the book, you actually hear them saying the quotes on the Audible version.
Yeah, I'd rather have people, actually talk in their own voice. And when I interviewed them, I shot it, with a couple of cameras and an independent audio just for later purposes like that. And, this is not just a light interview. Sometimes they go on for a couple of minutes, and it'd just be weird for me to read their parts, like when they actually said them themselves.
Yeah. And you are, the narrator of the book itself, which is always welcome. And you bring some theater to your presentation.
Yeah, I've been on stage for doing stand-up for 10 years and generally my whole life, so it was actually a lot of fun to perform the book. It's a little more than a reading.
You're also a little bit of a techie, right?
Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah, I've been a tech geek and nerd my entire life. I grew up playing with computers, taking them apart, rarely putting them back together until I got a little older. But I had early access to the web, and I just mostly love what it's bringing to the world.
And you've done a lot of the digital stuff for The Onion, right? Or are you still doing it?
Yeah, been with The Onion. I joined in November of 2007 as politics editor and web editor, and later retitled myself Director of Digital. It is a more profound label, and I'm a fan of profundity.
I should give myself a more profound title. I'm going to give that some thought.
What's your title?
So it's a very funny book. It also, though, it obviously has a serious purpose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Comedy, the coding.
And, is it easy to say what the purpose of it is in a couple sentences?
Sure. It's a memoir that explores, one person, me, and my coming of blackness, and sort of different angles on the role that race has played in my coming to be and in my being, and lessons that I learned along the way, and kind of interacting with the wider, generally non-black world. And I punctuated with interviews of some hilarious and insightful people. But it's generally, overall a new sort of flag in the ground for identity and what it is to be and how one can live that life using comedy as a sugary coating to help the pill go down.
Right, but I guess what is the pill in the sense of? I think you want to improve things. It's clear you want to send a message to your readers that will help them come to terms in some sense with race. And one thing that's interesting to me is it doesn't seem to me that you had in mind either an exclusively white or an exclusively black audience. Of course, an author never wants to say, my book is only for any subset of people. You want to say, I want all of humanity to buy my book, right? But usually, an author, when you're writing, you have in mind a kind of a person you're writing for. And I was wondering, were you thinking, I'm writing this for white people, for black people, I'm writing parts of it for are specific. There are parts of it I could point to that I would say are specifically for the edification of white people. But
okay.
What was your mission in that sense, in terms of what you wanted to do for particular audiences?
Yeah, my target demographic was generally teenage Laotians.
Yeah, they are big book buyers
big
in
cohort,
America, in the Midwest.
Good market. A lot of the spend is really increasing there. I wanted to speak. A lot of people are talking to them. So I saw a big market opportunity there, and I could really dominate the category. And then once I conquered them, I think there was sort of concentric circles of people. This definitely was not a book for black people. It wasn't a book for white people. It was mostly a book for smart people, for open-minded people, for people who enjoy humor. There are some people who really don't. They have poorer lives for it, but it's not my job to change them. And so I think there are sort of concentric circles of people that this book is for in terms of how they might identify with it. So for the person who is a lot like me, I mean, this book mirrors your life in many ways. You know, someone who was born in an urban setting, experienced some of the stereotypical Black American drama, single mother, drug dealing out the window, friends end up in jail. There's a bit of that, but then have gone on to private schools and Ivy League education, have worked in the corporate world. There is very much of like, oh, that's me, that happened to me too, and not a widespread reflection of that story. So those folks read the book as a validation of like, I am not alone. Like, I'm a Black person with a job, and it's pretty common, you know, but the message that often gets sent out is that there are these acceptable archetypes of Blackness that are heavily promoted. Then I think, you know, it's the flip side of those people. It's their schoolmates and their coworkers and their neighbors and, you know, the people for whom you are the Black friend. Like, I'm trying to give them a little insider scoop on what that world is. And then beyond that, I think it's more of a general market of we have gotten to this place where talking about race is really awkward and really uncomfortable. For some people, it's just exhausting. It's like, oh, we got a Black president. What more do you people want? And, you know, why do you have to blame everything on race? And so I think for folks like that, this provides a more comfortable entree into that conversation because of the comedy. Mm-hmm. You know, the political folks talk about these topics. Preachers talk about these. Professors certainly do. My language is generally humorous, and so I thought it'd be fun to mess with people. And I think just for the record, the Laotian teenage community has come a long way in its understanding of American race relations because of this book.
I've already heard from some of them, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so about your story. So, yeah, you grew up low-income part of Washington, I guess. Your father died. He was shot when you were very young.
Yeah.
And when I guess you were 5 or 6 or something. And then you wind up at Sidwell Friends. And for people who aren't from Washington, I think you got to know that isn't just an elite private school. In Washington, that is our elite school. And so that was like, so congratulations, do the end zone dance. But that was like major culture shock, I've got to think, right? I mean, you know, and you don't dwell on any kind of deep emotional trauma in the book or anything at all, or even really allude to any. But that must have been pretty strange.
Yeah, there was. You know, I grew up in DC, Black and Latino neighborhood, lower middle class folk, and you know, I started going to school across town in a whole different part of the city that I generally didn't go to, with people who I generally didn't know. It was a majority white environment, and I'd say a majority wealthy environment, especially relative to what I was used to. So there were class shocks, there were race shocks, there were some academic shocks. And I had a good amount of preparation from my own mother, who really, you know, pushed me and us together to explore, and she exposed me to a lot of the world. We went camping, went to farmers markets. She was kind of vegetarian. We traveled as much as was possible in these family road trips, staying in national parks. And so I wasn't completely sheltered. And I also had an academic program called Higher Achievement Program, which started in DC, that took promising, you know, inner city type school kids and gave them more academic rigor. And so I went to school after school when I was in public school, and I went to summer school programming to help me get ahead of the typical academic schedule in the grade school that I had gone to. So I showed up to Sidwell a little more prepared than I might have been, but not as much as I could have been. And some of you just got to jump in the fire and see if you can swim. You don't swim in fire. That
would be a mixed metaphor, I think it's safe
That'd be
to say.
You have to be a wizard to survive at Sidwell. And so I learned a bit of magic. I really did. And I had, while I was at Sidwell, I was also involved in this Pan-African Rites of Passage program for young Black kids to kind of bolster our sense of self and understanding of global Black history. And it was a nice reinforcement when going into a more foreign environment to, you know, feel like, yeah, I'm worth something. I know who I am. And that sort of kept me strong throughout. So the first year was tough. You know, the first year was a lot of adjustment, language adjustment, friend type adjustment. But by the 8th grade, I had started to be able to fit in a little more and assert myself a little more. Even when I showed up, I had this nickname of Barry. And within a year, I was like, no, you're going to call me Baratunde. That is my full name. It means all these things. And so I had a nice...
There's somebody else who was called Barry in his youth and later reverted to a less common name.
Yeah, he was like a community organizer in the Midwest somewhere. I think I read about
you've heard of him.
Yeah.
So you got to Sidwell, and it's in that part that there are some parts, that part of the book where some of these moments where I thought, you're kind of trying to help white people understand why some things are in the world. Like, I think it's there, right, that you said, sometimes black students would sit together at a table, like at lunch, and that's a source of puzzlement to white people, right, or to some white people.
There's a recurring set of, it's almost like there's a loop of experiences that happen in certain parts of the world. Like if you're in New York City right now, you're a young black or Latino kid, and you live, especially uptown, you're going to get stopped and frisked. Like it's just part of life. And you adjust to that, sadly. And you have less trust for law enforcement. You have all kinds of things which stem from that. If you're the black kid in a private school, there's just certain things that are going to happen. Like people are going to ask, why do you sit with black kids? Somebody's going to want to touch your hair and say what rich texture it is, and they're going to ask if they can touch it, but really they're already touching it when they're asking. And you're going to be put on the spot often to explain your people, whoever those people are. You got to explain, what do black people think about this? You get these moments where you're reading Huck Finn in the classroom, and people kind of look at you awkwardly at the more awkward parts of the book. You're a de facto ambassador for your race. And so part of what I've done throughout the book, and this is where the how-to chapters come in, is I tell these stories of what actually happened to me in a first-person sense, and then I offer a guide. And that guide is sort of written as a simulation for the reader to try to put you in the shoes. Like being the black friend is something that I learned at Sidwell. It's okay, you're probably going to be an outlier in a group of friends, and they're going to lean on you for a certain cultural insight. They're probably going to assume you're cool, even if you're not. They're maybe going to think you know where to get good weed, even if you don't. And so there's an opportunity there to mess with them, which is a lot of fun, but also to, in a more loving way, answer some of those questions, because they're not criminal by definition. They're not racist by definition. People have a curiosity, especially kids. And so you're in a school to learn, like there's a way to kind of walk that line and prevent them from making ignorant decisions later in their lives because they didn't have a black friend to lovingly explain, like, no, you shouldn't just walk up to a black person and touch their hair. Like, they need a friend to tell them not to do that.
Yeah. So, but, I mean, I guess there must be some white friends who don't bring up the subject of race, right? I mean, is that kind of a border that's crossed at some point sometimes in a friendship between a black person and a white person? I mean, I would think if you got to know a white person really well and you hadn't discussed race at all, wouldn't at some point that be a little awkward? Does that make sense?
I think, because of the country we're in, there's going to be some moment outside of your control that forces race upon you as a necessary conversation. So maybe you and your friend are trying to get a cab, very stereotypical but real example, especially in DC, like some of the worst profiling for cab passengers I've ever experienced, and I travel a lot, and I love DC as my hometown, but it's a very anger-inducing experience trying to get a cab. Or, when you're going through a convenience store, or when there's a sort of law enforcement type situation, something generally happens that forces, an explanation, from the black friend, or, you go grab the cab. Why? Because they're not going to stop for me. Why? Because, and then it opens up this box of different experiences, and that's where you have, an interesting opportunity to explain. So even if the friend doesn't actively bring it up, some situation often does.
Mm-hmm. But you often do wind up talking explicitly about race in friendships with white people.
Yeah. I mean, just like you talk about sports, it's part of life, and if there's conflict around it, if there's humor around it, if there's tension of any kind, it often, something you talk about, just like your hatred for the Yankees, for example, but, a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that's what I would expect.
Yeah.
So there's a phrase in the book called a blackness emergency. What you're talking about there is that sometimes when some event happens that brings race to the fore, it's like an all-points bulletin from the media to find people who can speak, somebody like you who they think can speak for black people. can.
Yeah.
It seems like we're in one of those right now, right? I mean, this is like first with the Trayvon Martin thing, then the Tulsa shooting, and now this I guess got a little less attention. But this John Derbyshire thing, this guy was fired for writing this racist thing. He was fired. National Review severed their relations with him for something he wrote for somebody else. So I mean, this seems almost like. Not quite unprecedented, but the last 2 weeks, it seems to me like these issues have been in the air a lot more than
Yeah, we go through waves of this. I wrote slightly tongue-in-cheek this chapter, How to Speak for All Black People, which, we're often called upon to do. And the range of folks that the media calls on is expanding. And there was a time when it was like just the reverends, like Al and Jesse, ping-ponging back and forth to kind of there was this lust to replace a Farrakhan or a King or Malcolm X, to just have a simplicity about what do black people want? Who are they going to vote for? What do they think? And then Obama's candidacy created a very extended blackness emergency for the media. Because like, oh man, he's still here. Like we still have to keep talking about this. And the country's reacting, and the Republicans are reacting, the black people are reacting. And so there's almost a permanent blackness emergency that has coincided with his presidency. But then you do get these moments, like there's every 6 to 18 months, some cops are going to shoot a kid, you're going to have an Oscar Grant, you're going to have a Sean Bell, you're going to have a missing person, you're going to have a comment from a radio personality, or Rush Limbaugh somehow going to, betray expectations like even further. There's not really high expectations for him, but somehow he'll manage to miss even those, and then it forces this pundit emergency. It was like, okay, we gotta talk. What's going on? What's the deal? How's it happen? Who do we talk to? And so you're right. We're in an intense period of that with Trayvon and with the Tulsa thing, which flashes back almost 100 years to the big race riots that happened in that town. And then a Derbyshire type character. I mean, I think one of the things that is most interesting to me about this, like President Obama, like the ability for me to say that, like his existence as the commander in chief, sort of tests and forces out of the cracks a lot of the more subtle or hidden reactions we may have had. And I think from certainly not all white people, not even all Republicans, but there was a strain of like, oh, for some reason I don't like this dude. Must be forcing him to be Muslim or Kenyan or socialist or fascist or just anything but one of us. There's got to be another explanation other than, like, I just don't like his policies. We have to paint him as, like, not American. Mm-hmm. That tension that is persistent throughout his campaign, that has sort of evoked, more threats against the president than we've had in a very long time, and a lot of reactions. I think you see it in a Derbyshire-type state where people are just emboldened to kind of show more. So you
think that the Obama presidency makes a Derbyshire thing more likely to happen? That might not have happened. He might not have felt so inclined to take it up to that volume if we didn't have a black president.
I mean, for those who have felt that we've done enough for these black people already, like they had their civil rights movement, they had the affirmative action thing, they got Colin Powell and Michael Jordan and Oprah. Like I got a billionaire now. Like what else is there? And now they got the White House. Are you kidding me? Like there's just this sort of.
What do you people want? You want to be able to catch a cab or something? What is it?
Yeah, and I think not to be completely dismissive, we're in some very rough, strange economic times, domestically and globally, and that great middle class opportunity isn't there as much, and manufacturing's pretty much gone. And so when you see the changing of the country right before your eyes, and Obama symbolizes all kinds of change, he's sort of an immigrant, so you bring the Mexicans into it. He's sort of a Muslim because of the name, so you got Al Qaeda and fears of terrorism, and this idea that we have privileged and extended extra rights, to groups of Americans is very frightening to folks who feel like they're losing position in society, and more of the ugliness comes out because there's a clearer, simpler target sometimes when you look at the White House.
Had you expected this? I mean, I guess I'm asking: have the effects of the Obama presidency been less positive on balance than you had hoped?
Man, yeah. In many ways, they have. in some ways they've confirmed suspicions. I mean, the campaign got really, really ugly with the rallies and the puppets and the art, the very net, the watermelons on the lawn, like all this stuff. And you didn't always find the tops of the parties or representatives or Congress people sort of distancing themselves from that. In fact, they often helped fan those flames. So it was a little bit naive probably to think that that would all just go away. That said, I had, even independent of the race thing, I got really caught up. I campaigned personally a lot. I knocked on doors in Texas and Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia and New York. And I was trying to be that change I want to see and let America's not red, blue, it's purple. And that is, I think it's something you kind of have to hold somewhat onto, or it just gets really too dark, too pessimistic, too cynical, and you kind of lose your motivation to participate. I don't want to ever get to that level of kind of opting out of what's possible. But some of my exuberance has definitely been muted by the reality. The reality of the limits of the White House, the reality of some of the appointments that the president has made, the reality of the reaction that we've had. And so there's been this interesting dance. For me, like I remember when Van Jones was fired, essentially because Glenn Beck didn't like him. And that was an infuriating, sort of majorly depressing moment. Like I've known Van for a while. My friends have worked at the Ella Baker Center. And so you have on the one hand like a disappointment in the inability to realize all those hopes. But then you get some version of the Tea Party with all its nonsense, and you get a Derbyshire type moment, and you feel the need to defend, and you're like, oh man, we're still kind of at this sort of cultural tension and war, and so there's a tug, within my own personality, my own soul. I'm like, yeah, I still love this dude. I still love a lot of the things he stands for, a lot of potential, and I feel the need to defend, but I also I still want more, and so how do you? I'm not a progressive person who's like, oh, the president's failed me terribly. He's worse than Bush. I think that's extreme and unhelpful and just unuseful. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I didn't feel like, oh, I had higher hopes for what we might have been able to get done and how you bring people with you, into that office and sort of shift the tone of the country. It's a lot harder than I thought, and probably a lot harder than the president thought, as he's coming to find out.
Your disappointment is more with the reaction to his presidency than with the way he's conducted it. I mean, there's a little of both, or what?
There's definitely a little of both. I mean, I'm very unexcited about the civil liberties history, about the drone over reliance. There have been some elements of the global war on terror pursuit which are very much consistent with, and even surpass some of what Bush was doing with his executive power and overseas. At the same time, I'm thrilled when I, note that when his first address overseas, President Obama, was in Cairo, and he used the words democracy, and he certainly probably had a role in kind of helping inspire those kids to keep going. He didn't start it, he can't take credit for it, but he was there and did something that is historically beautiful. Or, what he's doing with the green jobs work and then energy. I'm a big fan of a lot of that, and even the way that they're engaging the public and trying to bring people into the process. Our whole democracy is set up in general to resist change. And he came in waving that flag, there was going to be some tension. So in some areas, he hasn't embraced that change. Tim Geithner, Larry Summers aren't really representatives of significant fiscal and economic change. But on the other hand, he has done a lot of other things, which I'm excited about. So on net, to speak like a little business person, I'm happy. I could be happier. And I'm occasionally disappointed, but that's how it works. He's not me, and if I were in his shoes, I might be making some of the same choices.
But separate from that, you've been, sounds like, a little surprised by how tough the environment he's working with is. I mean, in terms of race, right? I mean, in terms of some. I would think that growing up in the context you grew up and growing up black. There wouldn't be a lot out there that could surprise you at this point about, hostility or resistance that a black person could encounter. But you've been a little surprised, actually?
I've been disappointed, and especially because I was on the change wave. Like, I was very excited. And then you just get hit with the reality that, to borrow a Rumsfeldian phrase, like, you get the country you have, not necessarily the one you've idealized and the one you want. And certainly the people that I interact with on a regular basis, are much further to the left, are much more open-minded, and you just get reminded, especially during political campaigns, and we're going into one again, of just how vast the country is and how afraid people can be and how ugly the tone, the turn that the tone can take. And so surprising isn't quite the right word, but disappointed at the persistence. I mean, the birth certificate thing is one of the best, worst examples that could ever happen. And you take, this idiot, Donald Trump, and you look, here's a guy who, like, inherited everything great about him, and, has ridden the sort of the white supremacist wave and the inherited wealth wave and managed to destroy it a couple times. I mean, given multiple chances to resurrect himself, doesn't even really own his buildings, but makes money off the brand of Trump that he's been able to artificially inflate, throws himself into a fake political campaign to essentially gin up his price on his culture-destroying reality TV show, and feels empowered to demand from the President of the United States, like, I want to personally see a birth certificate. And it is not only, he's not just the problem, like the cameras that kept focusing on him and kept putting mics in front of him, that thought his was a newsworthy guy that the country needed to hear from because he has something to say about like that presumption of authority, of the right to call in someone's papers. That's one of the ugliest moments probably in the whole of the presidency. I mean, let's say his economic policy is black, but let's not say he's not one of us. Like, that's an unnecessary justification to dislike. There are many reasons to dislike any president. Number one being they're the president, so they're already making mistakes, they're taking money, they're doing a bunch of disappointing things. But the level of credibility that someone like Donald Trump still enjoys, he's not shunned. He's still invited. He's still part of the conversation. That is extremely disappointing. I don't think I would have expected, even from the country that has been so historically, regularly disappointing to people like me, even that was like a bit of a shock. I'm like, wow, Mitt Romney will bring this dude up on stage where I'm proud to have the Donalds. And like, really? And there's no political price to be paid for that still? Okay, so this is a different country. That's a good reminder. It's a sad reminder, but it's kind of good to know the whole of what we're working with.
I mean, would you hope that in some small way, like your book could help even along this dimension? I mean, again, it clearly has a constructive purpose behind it.
Yeah.
What could Donald Trump learn from your book?
I mean, everything. I don't think he understands a page of it. He's got to talk and doesn't listen, and that's part of his thing. And so he is probably a terrible example because he is an extremely egomaniacal person, and he's got people around him who feed that. And it's too late. I don't think we can save Donald Trump and have him have some major internal change or epiphany. He's making too much money doing what he does.
Yeah.
We could change how we react to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is some responsibility to be had by the larger culture for someone like him and be like, don't feed his flames. Like, don't empower him to do even more cultural and political damage just by shifting the conversation in these weird ways. I think there's real harm done when we legitimize, people like that. And so in terms of this book and what good it might be able to do, I don't think Trump's going to read this and open up his mind suddenly. But maybe someone who's a producer on a news segment will choose a different story or will cast him in a different light or things like him and have a little bit more of a base of experience from my voice and from the voices I hold into this book. And maybe they'll be likely to read it because it's not coming out of a typical reverend's mouth, and I'm not running a protest down the middle of the street. It's a humor book, right? So even if you disagree with it, it's pretty fun. And I think that softening of the tension, I think that's one of the important elements of what I was trying to do, which is like, it's not simple. It's not like, oh, black people are right and white people are wrong. Like, come on, we're well beyond that now. And not to mention the brown people in the middle who are an increasing part of the demographics and the conversation of the country. But I think you can lay down arms a little bit and through story, through actual human story and human connection. I can't tell you the number of people who have identified with my mother, who is a very important force within this book. And I've got Colombians and Greeks and even white people telling me their stories of what their mom did, or women who've been asked to speak on behalf of all women and sort of explain this thing when they're in a room full of mostly guys. So we have all, to some degree, been on the outside, even if for a moment. And those moments, collectively, create a shared experience. And if we can see each other as part of a shared experience, increasingly, rather than, well, this is my America and that's your America and you're trying to destroy mine, then I think we can move slowly but steadily in a better direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Toward the end of the book, you talk about something you call open source blackness. And relatedly, you talk about, kind of whimsically, about a Center for Experimental Blackness.
Yeah.
It's something kind of serious there, too, right? I mean, what are you talking about?
So what I'm getting at there is, we've had internally within the black community and certainly externally reinforced limited notions of what black folks can do, right? Black people don't camp, they don't do yoga, they don't tip, they don't show up on, like, some are silly, some are funny, some are painful, some are true to a degree or another, but none of them is all-encompassing of the black experience. And for someone like me who does a whole bunch of stuff, and I've worked at the Onion, and that is not a black institution. I've traveled the world a lot. I have gone camping. My sister runs a yoga studio in Lansing, Michigan, and we're still very black people. And we're still fully grounded in our ancestry and our history and elements of what is seen as black culture. But I also wanted to, through my own stories and the folks I interviewed, say essentially whatever black people are doing is black culture, and encourage folks to not feel beholden to some prescribed idea, like, oh, if you're a black woman, you have to be sassy. Like, what if you're not a sassy person? If you're a black dude, you have to be like ultra masculine and love hip hop. What if you like punk or country or whatever? Like, that's cool. I grew up listening to Garrison Keillor. I'm still very black. So it's to allow for a more open version and sort of open source. And one of the notions that a woman I interviewed said, her name is Jaquetta Zatmari, and she likened it, she said she wished that black people had something like the Jews in America have with Israel, this birthright, this idea, like, just leave, just go for a summer or a semester or a year. And for black people, just get out of America, like, go see other countries. You might be surprised at what people think of you. They, when she went to, I forgot, I think it was Budapest or something, she was like, people assumed because she was American, she was a doctor. And she's like, that is not the assumption people make about black folk here in America. It's like, oh, I'm broke, or I'm a drug dealer, or I know certain things that, she grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Her black experience is not the one that has been marketed and packaged and resold to an entire nation. So what I was calling for, sort of summing up a lot of this, was blackness is what black folk are doing, and to actively encourage the pursuit and the experimentation with all that the world has to offer. Like, we are, as a people, as a country, as a planet, probably, things are too complicated. The challenges and opportunities are way too big, both sides of that coin, to have a narrow view of the world, to have some idea of, like, limiting your experience and your exposure and the types of people and interactions you want to have. We can't afford to do that. We have a world with global competition where China and Brazil are not really waiting, and they have their own issues, obviously. But if we keep twiddling our thumbs talking about my America, your America, we're going to miss some solutions, and we're going to miss some opportunity in that process, and that includes within the black community.
You, in your encounters with white people, this is a pretty...
Yeah, there have been 6 of them.
There have been a total of 6. Well, good. And this part won't take long then.
Yeah.
I guess in America it's pretty easy to have an encounter with a white person. Just kind of walk around and it happens.
It depends on where you live.
Yeah. But I mean, do you get the sense that a large majority of them are fundamentally people of goodwill, in the sense that, when you encounter someone in a context where they're clearly kind of reacting in some sense, they're clearly aware that, well, that you're black, if this makes sense. I mean, let me back up. I want to back up. I want to ask another question, which is that I've thought before, I'm a person who, I'm a little bit maybe on the paranoid side or something. It's like, it's easy for me to, like, somebody's saying something and I'll think, oh, there's a subtext there. They're talking about me, and or they're looking at me suspiciously. It's like when I, as a kid, would walk into a store, I would, like, assume I'm under suspicion, right? And I've thought, if I'm like this, if I were black, I would go crazy, right? Because it really is often the case that people are reacting to you as a black person, right? I mean, that white people, especially white people who don't see that many black people, are doing that. So my first question actually is kind of, is it easy to get over that? Is it easy to live in a world where, in fact, many people you encounter, their initial appraisal of you has to do with your blackness? Is it easy to just forget about that? To go through life not aware of that, of their awareness of your...
No, I mean, I think for large numbers of black people, it isn't easy. There's an extra process that is often running in the CPU of your mind, which is general suspicion, general looking over the shoulder, general hyper-awareness of security, of law enforcement, of judgments being made about you for potentially race-based reasons. And that's part of the cancer of racism, especially in this country, is that it adds that extra burden. Like, all those mental resources being used to look over your shoulder and double guess people's intentions is not being used to solve a problem, but it's not being used to paint a picture, to draw a piece of art, to raise a kid, to create financial value. Like, we're not unlimited in terms of our energy as human beings. And so if you're devoting that much of your time to wondering why that baby looked at you that way, is it because you're black? The other troubling thing it does is it often reinforces, the negative stereotype. I mean, I actually had this conversation with a dude in a bodega last week in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I'm rocking this hoodie, right? I got my How to Be Black hoodie on. And he's like, what is this How to Be Black? He's a dude that was born in, I don't remember which country in Africa. I put it on my podcast, but he will find that, like, black people who come into his store, and he's a black man, he offers to help them, like, oh, can I help you? And they immediately react with aggression. Like, why are you asking me if I need help? You think I'm going to rob you? I'm not here to rob you. I just want to follow. And it's, because they've had enough experiences of people illegitimately profiling them that they are suspicious of him. Meanwhile, that reaction then makes him less likely to help the next black person. And so it's this vicious descending spiral of suspicion, of the assumption of ill will. And that is destructive, culturally. It prevents relationships or destroys ones that exist. And all of a sudden, that small example of, I walk into that store and I might actually need help. And I'm open to it, and he won't ask. Mm-hmm. So I leave frustrated at the terrible customer service because I'm black, right? Maybe. That's what we have to try to break. And it's not, I don't think we live in a world where people are consciously, actively, maliciously racist. Like, that's just, even in the past, that generally wasn't the case. Most white people a couple generations ago, they just weren't aware. The country sold them on the suburban dream, and they had some fears of crime, but they weren't, like, actively angry at black people. They just, they were segregated from them. And now we're in this place, I think it's even softer. No one cares that much about black people, right? But we all carry around some subconscious fears and assumptions and presumptions that can be very damaging.
And do you think, and this gets back to the question I was going to ask, do you think most white people are of goodwill in the sense that, to the extent that they're aware of your blackness, they would like you to know that they like you? In other words, if they become aware of race at all, they want to send a positive message. Is that your impression that?
I think, there are certain types of white people who, want to over-communicate.
Right. The next question was going to be, are they awkward about it? But the first question is, do they mean well?
One of the worst things you can call a white person is racist, right? It just triggers all these fears. I mentioned in the book, Key and Peele, the Comedy Central show, had a great sketch about it. And they were like, look, calling a white person a racist is like worse than calling a black person the N-word. Like it is their N-word for a certain type of white person, for especially a liberal, progressive-leaning white person who imagines him or herself to be like post-racial and colorblind and like, I just want to see people for who they are in their heart areas. Like that's fine. But then, there's this often attempt to like over-connect. Let's hit you with the fist pound, my brother. It's like, whoa, like just be you. It's cool. Like you don't have to prove your cultural blackness or what you think cultural blackness is to me. So yeah, so short answer, yeah, I think most white people have goodwill. I think most people in general don't have the time to have ill will towards someone else. Some folks have had terrible experiences, which colors their view of the world, or have been exposed to a way of being raised that color their view of the world. But I don't think that's the vast majority. I think the vast majority are just cool people who don't know, and who often get tired of being lumped in with ill will, with those of ill will. Like, well, I'm not that type of white person. I didn't enslave you. I'm not Donald Trump. Like, I think Obama's great.
Right.
Or I think he's as middling as the average president. Not because he's black.
Right.
So it's that awkwardness.
They want to advertise their goodness.
Yeah. And I think that's where there's not much you can do. I mean, I think that's where you make a joke. Like break that weird tension, because we've all been awkward in some way or another, whether it's between the sexes, or between the races, or between the classes. Like some of us have some place we don't know how to behave because we haven't really been exposed.
Well, if nothing else, those kinds of reactions make for some amusing moments in your book. You get a certain amount of mileage out of the attempts of white people of goodwill to demonstrate their goodwill and or their coolness.
Yeah.
So it's a great book. Congratulations. Has it changed anything? I mean, your career path or anything? Has it led you in different directions? The reception to it?
Yeah, I'll be offering courses in blackness.
Good.
Through
sign me up.
Do some webinars, and you'll get to different levels of blackness. $1,000 a session is going to be great. It's a good positive move. Now, I've been overwhelmed and exhausted to a degree by the reaction. I've been humbled by it. I've been excited by it. I mean, there's been a very positive overall reaction. I was braced for a wider spectrum of feedback, especially just given the title, and that hasn't really happened. It's been out for a couple of months now, so I think I've probably experienced the most of the types of reactions that I will have. And I've been excited, I think, by the degree to which people identify with it who aren't black, right? And who are not necessarily trying to understand black people or prove their goodwill, just people who've been on the outside. And the Amazon review that is the most popular, I think it still is the case, and has this bold headline, "This isn't about being black." And like, that's kind of true. Like, it's how to be. And black is my particular variable because of when and where I was born and into whom I was born. But there are all sorts of folks who share some element of the story. And if we can find that commonality, I think we can be a little bit better. And there's a level of comfort with yourself that makes others comfortable with you. And black people, white people, Laotian teenagers, I think we can all do a bit better at that.
So that is the generic lesson about how to be. I mean, if you put the moral of the story in terms that don't make reference to any race or any person's social position or any way or anything like that, what is the moral of the story?
It's really simple. If I had said it, I wouldn't have had 272 pages of a book to tell the story. I think the story is more interesting. But it comes down to age-old advice, which is be yourself. And being comfortable in your own skin, whatever color that skin is, and projecting that comfort, is a positive influence on the world. That wraps up the experimental, that wraps up, using humor to diffuse situation. It captures a lot of the spirit of the thing. But when you start trying to accommodate people's expectations of who you are, or letting those expectations so define you in a negative way, in a negative reactionary way, even if you're not trying to accommodate it, you are limiting your own potential, your own discovery of yourself. I mean, one of the big lessons I found was, when I was in high school, I had a lot of duties as sort of a professional black person, right? I was like head of the Black Student Union. I was explaining this, explaining that, and advocating for this and that. And when someone says something negative and it affects me, like it hurts me because I'm a human being. Over time, I acknowledge those things are still going to happen. They affect me less. They affect my sense of self-worth less. Not that they aren't important, not that they shouldn't try to be stopped, but they're not going to stop me or make me feel less than who I know I am. And I think that lesson, that comfort and confidence in yourself, that's a universal aspiration of like the human race. And a lot of the world would be improved if people got to that point of be limitless, and certainly don't overly react or accept the bounds that people try to draw around you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so at the beginning when I said the book is both for black people and white people, I had in mind white people reading the book to understand the black experience better, understand better how they might productively relate to black people and so on. But it's also for white people in the sense that they could almost fill in the word black with white, and kind of transplant your lessons that are in the context of being black into the context of being white, and use it as a self-help book. So that's another 1 million copies or so to be sold once people realize that.
I was thinking ahead, man. If somebody wants to write How to Be White, we should work out a licensing arrangement.
Yeah.
We can get that done.
You should copyright How to Be Blank.
I got the domain names. I got
everything?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you, Robert.
And thanks for taking the time. And continue. Good luck with the book.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.